And joining us now on the line from the nation's capital is Canada's International Trade Minister Stockwell Day. Minister, welcome back to the program. Nice to see you again.
Good to be with you, Steve.
Well, we all know the United States has inserted these Buy American provisions into many and increasingly larger numbers of government projects. Given that Canada is in the North American Free Trade Agreement with the United States, maybe we could start here and have you explain to our viewers, wouldn't that kind of protectionist measure be illegal under NAFTA?
That's a good question, Steve. The fact is, when NAFTA was signed, neither the provinces nor the states had to sign on or agree to the same provisions as the federal governments did. So, in fact, provinces and states have been trading pretty freely back and forth across the border, but they're not under the same legal obligations to do so under NAFTA as at the federal level. That's why if they want to choose to be protectionist, technically they can do that without facing sanctions under NAFTA.
Okay, let me ask about the national government now in the United States. We all know that for many, many decades it's been a particular strain in Congress of protectionism, particularly around some of the border states. But what about with this administration? They haven't been in office very long. Have you been able to gauge how much protectionism you think infuses those who are making decisions in the Obama administration?
That's been key to this whole matter, Steve. You'll recall when the Buy America law first came out, Prime Minister Harper spoke out very clearly and publicly saying that the U.S. had to live up to their international trade obligations. And about 4 days after that, President Obama said the U.S. will live up to their trade obligations, and he made sure that a clause to that effect was inserted into this Buy America Act. But once that left the White House, literally, and got to Congress, Congress is now, a lot of the congressmen and congresswomen are being very protectionist, and what they've done is they've caused the application of the Buy America effectively to slam the door on Canadian providers of products and services. That's where it is really hit hard, and in fact, one of the points that we are making on a number of levels with our U.S. counterparts is that they're going against what the President said, not just related to Buy America, but in November at the G20 leaders meeting, and again in early 2009 at the G20 in London. He was one of 20 world leaders who said all countries should abstain from putting on any more protectionist activities. So they're defying what he has said nationally and internationally.
And you have followed up from there and said, if this keeps up, quote, retaliatory action is inevitable. Could you define better what you meant by that?
I will, Steve. This is what we're concerned about. What we're seeing now, there's already about half a dozen municipalities in Canada that are supporting a resolution which is going to go to their federal body. All the municipal leaders will be meeting in British Columbia, and one of the resolutions is going to be that no municipality should do any business with any country, and they didn't name USA, but I mean everybody knows who they're talking about, that is taking protectionist measures. Now, I understand the municipality doing that. Some municipalities are being hurt in this process in Canada, and they're retaliating. The problem is retaliatory trade wars wind up hurting everybody in the room. It's very devastating stuff. I mean, we go back historically, 1929, when the world was in recession, it was the U.S. that came forward with a very protectionist piece of legislation called the Smoot-Hawley Bill, which was barring certain products coming into the U.S. So immediately, of course, constituents in other countries went to their political leaders and said, we have to push back. Other countries began to retaliate. That led to a full-scale retaliatory trade war. That plunged us into a Great Depression.
Well, it's not just the politicians, Minister. I'm sure you saw the comments of Jason Myers, the head of the Canadian Manufacturers and Exporters Association the other day, who said he even wanted you guys to start threatening trade sanctions against the United States. What do you think of that option?
I met with Jason, and he is very concerned, rightly as he should be, for the people that he represents on the exporters and manufacturers. In terms of sanctions, as I've already explained, it's difficult to do that under NAFTA. What we're doing is we have some proposals that we're bringing to the Americans. We're doing this in a very aggressive way, saying, look, here's some things we'd like you to consider to deal with this particular problem. We can't have it continue. It's already affected when these appropriation bills for their stimulus package, and this is money that goes out to municipalities and to states, as it goes through the appropriation process, it gets tagged, or some of our people are saying it gets contaminated with this insistence that U.S. municipalities and state funding be protectionist. In other words, not allow Canadians who are often in there providing the goods and services to even bid or do this type of work. And we want that contamination to stop.
Gordon Gibson, your fellow Western Canadian, was quoted as saying this the other day: when a town in California instructs a contractor to rip up some piping because the valves were made in Canada, you know you have a problem. But he goes on to say the Americans can reply, your provinces do the same thing. Is he right about that, or are our provinces just as protectionist?
Our provinces have the ability to do the same thing because they're not bound by the federal legislation, by the NAFTA legislation. But in practice, provinces have not been doing that. When there is work to be done, they open up those bids because they want to get the best bids for their taxpayers, obviously. The problem is, so historically our provinces haven't done that. In fact, they're complying with what the G20 leaders have asked for. Provinces were already complying with. They were not adding protectionist behavior. But now with the Americans doing this at the state and municipal level, you can bet the provinces are going to be under pressure to do the same. And that's going to wind up, I understand them wanting to do that, but we're trying to get this cut off at the pass and have it resolved before we see that kind of protectionist war start. Anytime you build up protectionist walls, economies come down, and we want to avoid that.
Well, I know, for example, here in the province of Ontario, the New Democratic Party in the legislature has been urging the McGuinty government to adopt a Buy Ontario policy for, right across the spectrum. Obviously, the province of Ontario being a huge procurer of goods and services. The McGuinty government's resisting that. Do you think that's the right move?
They need to resist that. NDP governments philosophically and ideologically are opposed to free trade anyway, which is an unfortunate position. Canada is as prosperous as it is because we trade. We've had to do that since our very beginnings, and we trade freely. We've got free trade agreements that we've just passed in Parliament that are going to open up more opportunities for our workers, our investors, and the people who deliver services. So to go down a trail of, as I said, building up trade walls, economic history is very clear on that. Everybody gets hurt in the process. We want to see windows and doors of opportunities opened for Canadian workers, not closed.
And again, just so I'm clear, I understand that NAFTA only affects things on a national jurisdictional level. Would you like to see NAFTA expanded so that provincial and municipal procurement is included in that as well?
You know, Steve, you're onto a key point there, because just yesterday I had my federal officials meeting with provincial officials on this very question. And now they were meeting at the official level, so it hasn't got, I'm not saying this has endorsement at the provincial level, but we just signed over in Europe, the Prime Minister, I was with him in Prague about 3 weeks ago, we just signed to start official negotiations for a free trade agreement with the EU. Now that would be great opportunity for us. That would be opening up trade with 27 countries in Europe. To do that, we've brought the provinces to the table at an unprecedented level, saying, look, provinces, territories, we want you there, we want you in those discussions, we want you to be fully engaged. And they have committed to do that, and they're very pleased to be involved now at that level. So what we're doing is now saying the same thing related to NAFTA, saying, look, whether you sign on officially to NAFTA, we're asking you to consider some kind of procurement agreement that will defend us from the charge in the United States that provinces aren't buying into this either. And that's a process we've started at the official level, had some initial discussions at the provincial level, and I'm hoping that we get a positive response from provinces and territories on that.
Okay, Minister, let's finish up in our last few minutes here by continuing this look outward, if you like. And I want to reference in particular the Canada's State of Trade report that you released earlier this week. One of the highlights being the exports to the so-called BRIC countries, Brazil, Russia, India, China, We're going to put some numbers up on our screen here to share with our viewers, and these are the Canadian export increases 2007 to 2008 to those four countries. And the numbers, I mean, Brazil, our trade up to Brazil, to Brazil, 71% higher, Russia 30% higher, India 35% higher, even China, which has been such a tough nut to crack, up 10%. If you look at the percentage, however, of the 2008 Canadian exports to those countries, even though the numbers are double-digit increases, Brazil still makes up just 0.5% of our trade, Russia 31% of our trade exports, India 0.5%, China a little over 2%. As you consider all of those numbers, what is the important thing that jumps out at you?
The important thing is the numbers reflect a policy we're pursuing, and that is to open up doors of opportunities, reduce taxes as far as is reasonable on our businesses that want to export, make sure the regulations are not overly burdensome. Obviously, we have to protect the public and have the range of regulatory regime there. But what we're saying is, look, it's great that we live right next door to the United States. We're the envy of most countries in the world because of that, because geographically we're tied to a great consuming partner, and that's good for us on trade. But when your consuming trade partner begins to lose its appetite because of their present problems, you can be left high and dry. And that's why we've been pursuing, even before this downturn, policies that would encourage business people and investors in Canada to look further afield for opportunities. So you're quite right. As a percentage, these are small numbers. The direction is what is key here. We're seeing that pursuing this policy of saying, look, do business in the U.S., that's fine, they're our strongest partner, but don't become totally dependent on that. There are great opportunities abroad, and we're vigorously at the government level pursuing those opportunities, opening the doors, making sure that if Canadian entrepreneurs, workers, and investors want to look further afield, that they won't be overly burdened by government regulation or taxes. The opportunities will be there, and it's starting to pay off. Those numbers, as you pointed out, those are end of 2008, so it even integrates the start of the downturn. We're already affecting those numbers, and yet you still see the increases. That's why we're being so aggressive on these free trade agreements with other countries, opening doors of opportunities for Canadian workers and Canadian producers. Just
curious though, Minister, what would have attributed to, or what would you attribute to a 71% increase to Brazil? That's a pretty big increase over, admittedly, just 0.5% of our trade, but still, what would you attribute it to?
Steve, part of that in terms of the value shows the dollar, the effect of the Canadian dollar. And it was a good year in terms of some energy-related products and our extractive sector, the mining sector, in terms of joint ventures. And these are proving to be very positive. If you have a joint venture working closely with another government or, in fact, a business organization in another country on a joint venture, you have far more ability to come out with projects that are beneficial to both sides and fully respect environmental and local social conditions. So there was quite a bump in that level of activity and the machinery that goes with it. That's really what accounted for it. Again, it shows the openness and willingness of Canadian companies if they feel that they can do this and they've got support we have in place. In countries where we don't have a free trade agreement, what we do is we sign what's called a foreign investment protection agreement so that both sides understand what the rules of engagement are, they understand what's expected of them. It gives a platform of predictability, and then they're more liable to invest, either us in Brazil or Brazil making investments in Canada.
Okay, in our last minute, let me share two more charts with our viewers, and this is total Canadian imports and exports vis-a-vis the United States now. And the import number has gone down. We've got numbers from 1992, then to 96, 2000, 04, and 08, and it's a downward trend all the way along, pretty much from 96 on. If we look at total Canadian exports, the key of these bar graphs that we're showing is that, again, same time period, 92 to 08, we are about where we are today, where we were in 1992. And I wonder whether that says, do you infer the kind of bad news from that, as I suspect most people would?
Well, overall trade has grown in terms of the raw dollars, and it shows there the percentages are roughly the same. In terms of imports, anytime there's a chart, say over the last 10 years, or that integrates figures over the last 10 years that shows Canadians importing less from the U.S., China is a factor there, as products have been more competitive coming out of China, coming out of England, coming out of India, and in some cases coming out of the EU. So again, it shows that by opening up doors, not just for Canadians to invest abroad, but as other countries do this, then products and services, whether they're high-tech or low-tech, become more competitive. If they meet our standards in terms of health and safety and other things, then they're going to be, Canadians are going to have greater choices. And that's where you'll see if a choice is made for a product that's not coming from the U.S. and it's viable, it meets our standards, and the price is competitive, then Canadians are going to make that choice. And it's also a message to Americans that, you know, we are here, we are great trading partners, we have a very strong and positive history, but Canadians are open to alternatives.
I do hear that message, but on the other hand, at the end of the day, the government of Canada's job, first and foremost, I guess, is to attend to the needs of its citizens. And if if the pro-trading message, which you'd like to have going forward with the United States, doesn't take hold, how do you protect Canadians at the end of the day to make sure we don't suffer overly adversely as a result of this increasing protectionism that we're seeing?
Well, on the protectionism side, this is where we have to really dig in and remind the Americans that, yes, we've got this great trade agreement, and the trade agreement has been very positive on both sides. We point out to them the 37 states, there are 37 states who actually depend on Canada, that we are their #1 business partner. Over 7 million jobs are dependent on that, and we remind them, look, if you engage in this protectionist activity, U.S. workers get hurt also, and we've got case studies on that. You mentioned one that's sort of become the poster child, where some pipes were literally pulled out of the ground. But we have cases where Canadian companies have had to, they've been shut out from making a bid, and therefore they've had to cancel, let's say, an order of steel pipe that they were going to bring in from the U.S., redesign, and then use in the very project that they were going to bid on in the States. They canceled that pipe order out of the U.S. Those Americans who were making that pipe wind up out of work. Everybody winds up getting hurt. No system is perfect, but if you have a free trade system that is based on clearly understood rules, clearly countries who engage that way see prosperity levels rise. We want to see that continue to happen and not deteriorate.
Understood. Minister Day, good of you to join us on TVO tonight. Thanks so much.
Thanks for your interest.